Okay, so we have to talk about the Strand subclass and how powerful it can be if played correctly. Rob, Rowdy, and myself decided to test our build in the new difficult Nightfalls, so we went into the Legend 1830 power level Nightfall where we are 40 power level under. And as most of you know, the hardest activity in the game where I play with a lot of my builds is in Grandmasters, which are 25 power level under. So technically we're even at a more disadvantage than a GM. I mean, these enemies literally have skulls next to their names. That's kind of scary to see that when I'm so used to swords. Needless to say, this Strand build that we all rocked together handled it so well, as you can see in the gameplay, and it's all thanks to this build, the suspend debuff, and the severing debuff to keep those tanky enemies from pushing us or even shooting at us at some points. And there are two fragments that we can use that just gives us an insane amount of melee energy and class ability energy to let us loop those abilities pretty much infinitely if played correctly. Strand at its core is just a lot different than other subclasses, as you really need to play into your melee ability and your class ability. And then on top of that, you have to play into the tangles a lot. Tangles add a lot to the overall build, so make sure to pay attention to that. And then with your class ability, that's on all three classes as well, because each of them can do a lot with the class ability, and I think that's where people are comparing Strand and light-based subclasses and thinking your grenades maybe should be up more often or be hitting a lot harder, but the way Strand is set up currently, you just won't have a good time doing that, at least in harder content. Yeah, sure, you can have a great time with a ton of threadlings on the Warlock, but those don't currently transfer into endgame content very well, at least with our current fragments anyways. So hopefully that threadling fragment that's going to be unlocked in the future will boost their damage a lot, because they need it in endgame content. So that's why we're building to the class ability and the melee ability much more for that suspend debuff and severing debuff. So if you commit to the crowd control playstyle with Strand and the suspend debuff, you will have a blast in any content, and you just have to understand what Strand is built for currently, and that is crowd control, and it does it even better than stasis, as you can see in the gameplay, and it is more fun than stasis because you are doing a lot when incorporating tangles, and you can be much more aggressive with it. I wasn't even using my grenade that often, so I might have gone to the grapple grenade if I ran it again. This build will provide you with infinite class ability, which is crazy strong on the Titan thanks to what it can do with the exotic, infinite melees when combined with tangles feeding it, and woven mail feeding it as well, infinite woven mail, so straight up damage reduction all the time, which only helps since we got hit with that 10% resilience nerf, and a very underrated debuff, which is sever, that makes it so enemies output way less damage and could even get stomped by that boss 40 power level under and easily survive it. Now for your class ability, choose whichever you like. I go with Rally Barricade, but our cooldown is the same between both thanks to our aspect. Now we only have one melee, and this is Frenzy Blade. Activate your charged melee ability to dash forward, slashing at targets in front of you and severing them. Now sever means the target's connection to the world around them are cut and their outgoing damage is significantly reduced. Severed targets unwind into a tangle when defeated, but that significantly reduced outgoing damage from them is really important. Now for the aspects, we only have two aspects. We're locked into both of them, and that is Into the Fray. Destroying a tangle or casting your super grants woven mail for nearby allies. While you have woven mail, your melee regeneration rate is increased. And then our second aspect is Dranger's Lash. Activate your class ability to create a ripple in reality that travels forward along the ground, suspending and damaging targets that it hits. This thing will suspend everything in front of you that it hits, and it's just an awesome crowd control. And it turns our barricade into an offensive weapon, which is really fun. Now for your fragments, there's two really important ones, and the other two can be subbed out for future ones in the future that we're going to unlock. For the first one that's really important is Threat of Mind. Defeating suspended targets grants class ability energy. So when you pop your barricade and it goes out and it suspend targets and you defeat them, you literally get about 20% of your class ability for each kill that you get while they're suspended. And with mods that we're going to use where we get initially our class ability back really quickly, this just adds to it. That means you only need 1 or 2 kills while an enemy is suspended to get your full barricade back. This will also stun unstoppables for us, which is just awesome. Now our second fragment is Thread of Fury. This plays right into that tangle, and it says damaging targets with a tangle grants melee energy. Now if you guys have noticed throughout the gameplay, we have our melee a lot, same with the other titans that we're running with, and that's because we're always picking up those tangles and throwing them at enemies or shooting the tangles and making sure that we're damaging enemies with them. This thing can give literally like 2 full charged melees back if you throw it into a group of enemies or land it on a champion with multiple enemies around it. So it's just a really easy way to keep up your melee all the time. Now the next 2 fragments are interchangeable. You can do something different with them when you get the other ones unlocked. I had Thread of Wisdom on. Defeating suspended targets with precision final blows creates an orb of power. This is just going to feed our ability loop, so we get those 2 stacks of armor charge every time we pick up an orb Orb of Power. And then we also went with Threat of Warding. Picking up an Orb of Power grants Woven Mail. Now for stats on the build, obviously 100 Resilience for that 30% damage reduction all the time, and then you stack Woven Mail on top of it. And then High Recovery and High Discipline would be the other two stats I would build into. Now for your artifact mods, there's just a couple in here that's kind of important. We also went with Untangler. Destroying a Tingle with a Strand weapon suspends targets damaged by the explosion. So it's just another source of suspending targets when you shoot your Tingle and make it explode and suspend people. We also are going to take Volatile Flow. Picking up an Orb of Power grants you your Void Weapons volatile rounds. This lasts for like 14 seconds, and I'm pretty much going to use this all season on anything I do with Void Weapons because, as you guys know, volatile rounds is just a great perk to have. Next one I took is Allied Unraveling. Rapid Final Blows with a Strand weapon grants your weapon unraveling rounds with a longer duration near allies. This is really nice, especially with Quicksilver Storm, the primary Strand exotic, and I use that quite often. I just didn't use it in this gameplay. We also have Counter Weave. When you or a member of your fire team stun or defeats a champion, you gain energy for your least charged Strand ability. So this just feeds more ability for Strand, and it's when you stun a champion or defeat it. And then from the last column of the artifact, you have Threaded Blast. Destroying a Tingle with a Strand weapon creates a larger and more damaging explosion. A larger explosion means when you destroy that Tingle with a Strand weapon, a bigger area to suspend enemies. That's just going to feed into getting that class ability back and suspending everything around you. Now for our exotic, we are taking Abeyant Leap. This is the new exotic this season, and its armor perk is Puppeteer's Control. Dranger's Lash spawns 2 additional projectiles, so that's why we have 3 of them. Tracks targets more aggressively, so hopefully you hit your target more often, and travels further. Also gain Woven Mail when suspending targets. So we'll always have Woven Mail up with this build. That's why it's not so important to have the fragment on that provides Woven Mail, which is Threat of Warding, that we're going to trade out later. Now for the mods on the build, we're going to take Powerful Friends. Collecting an Orb of Power causes nearby allies to increase their current armor charge by 1. If you're running with a fire team, I would tell everyone to have this on because it's just going to feed those armor charges to everybody, and they're going to feed them to you. We're taking Void and Strand Dual Siphon, so our Void and Strand weapons can create Orb of Powers. We're going to take Heavy Handed on our arms. Your powered melee final blows create Orbs of Power. Because our Sever melee is pretty strong and we suspend stuff in the air, we're going to create an Orb of Power. That's one way that we're going to feed our loop. And then we're also feeding our loop from the Void and Strand Siphon on the helmet, and then feeding the loop from Thread of Wisdom, the fragment. So that's 4 different ways to create Orbs of Power. So now obviously if you have 2 other people running that, they're going to create a ton of Orbs of Power for you. We have Double Grenade Kickstart on the gauntlets, so we get that grenade back when we expend our grenade. Then on our class item, we're going to have 2 charged up mods. Increase the maximum number of stacks of armor charge you can carry, so that means we can carry up to 5 armor charges. And then I had Void Reserves on there. Increase the amount of ammo you can carry for Void weapons. For your boots, you're going to take stacks on stacks. Picking up an Orb of Power grants you 1 additional stack of armor charge. So now 2 Orbs of Power that you pick up will give you a total of 4 stacks. And then we're going to take Installation, reduce class ability cooldown each time you pick up an Orb of Power, and Innervation, reduce grenade cooldown each time you pick up an Orb of Power. And then on our class item, and the important one here, is 3 utility kickstarts. When your class ability energy is fully expended, you gain class ability. And then additionally, your armor charge is consumed and you gain additional class ability energy for each stack. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful, and I will see you guys all in the next video.